The wind screamed across the Nevada sagebrush. It was the autumn of 1884, a year of iron and blood. Mei Lin clutched her threadbare tunic against the biting cold. The silk of her old life in Canton was a ghost. Only the coarse, gray cotton of grief remained. She was 24 years old, but hunger had stolen the softness from her face. In the mirror of a frozen stream, she looked far older. Her husband lay in the unyielding earth of a collapsed silver mine. They had crossed the ocean together, chasing wages and a small, honest life. He had gone underground with a lunch pail in his hand. He never came back. No tombstone marked his rest, just the heavy, indifferent dust of the West. She had no coins in her pocket. She had no roof over her head. The berries on the wild bush were bitter. They were small, shriveled, and stained by the desert grit. Mei Lin did not care.
Bitter was better than the hollow ache of starvation. She reached out with fingers that would not stop trembling. The thorns pricked her skin like tiny needles. She did not flinch. She had known worse. A shadow fell over her. The horse was immense and dark as a thundercloud. It snorted, sending a plume of dust into the freezing air. Mei Lin froze. She did not look up.
She knew the look of men in this lawless territory. To them, she was a ghost, a nuisance, someone easy to ignore, blame, or push aside. She kept her eyes fixed on the shriveled berries. The man on the horse did not move. He did not draw a silver-plated revolver. He did not shout a command. He simply watched. Finally, he cleared his throat.
The sound was like gravel shifting in a tin cup. Mei Lin looked up. She saw a wide-brimmed hat, weathered by 1,000 suns. She saw a face carved from granite and stubbornness. His eyes were the color of the mountains at dusk. Dark. Quiet. Lonely. He looked at the berries in her stained palm. He looked at her hollow, shadowed cheeks.
He saw the marks of desperation written in the dirt on her brow. He did not offer her pity. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat. It was a small gesture. To Mei Lin, it felt like a mountain moving. "Them berries will give you the cramps," he said. His voice was steady. It held the weight of the earth. Mei Lin said nothing. Her English was a broken thing, held together by necessity. But she knew the universal word for hunger. She pointed to her parched mouth. The man sighed, a sound of weary resignation. He looked back toward the jagged horizon. There sat a ranch, the Thorn Ridge Ranch, a place of lowing cattle and endless dust, a sanctuary for lonely, hardened men. "My name is Silas," he said. He pointed to his broad chest. Mei Lin bowed her head low. It was a habit she could not break, a relic of a world she had left across the great ocean. Silas looked at the ranch house in the distance. He watched the thin, gray smoke rising from the chimney. The kitchen was cold. The stove was dark. His men were angry. They were tired of the taste of burnt beans. They were weary of salt pork that felt like leather. A ranch runs on its stomach. Right now, his ranch was starving for a home. He looked back at the woman. She looked fragile as a dried leaf. She looked like the next wind might blow her into the sky. But her eyes were made of iron. They were the eyes of a survivor who had looked at death and refused to blink. He took a slow breath. He asked the only question that mattered. Mei Lin blinked. The word cook was a melody she recognized. Her mother had taught her the secrets of the flame. Her grandmother had taught her the language of spice. In the village near Canton, she had been a master of flavor. In the drafty shacks of the mining camps, she had fed the weary. She had cooked for men who came back from the mines half frozen, half broken, and too tired to speak. She knew how to make a poor meal taste like survival. She had made feasts out of nothing but scraps and hope. "Cook," she whispered. She nodded her head. She nodded so hard her dark hair fell loose from its pins. "I cook," she said. Her voice was thin, but it did not waver. Silas reached down from his saddle. He offered his hand. It was a massive hand. It was calloused, scarred, and warm. Mei Lin hesitated for a heartbeat. In 1884, the world was a jagged, dangerous place. The Chinese Exclusion Act had been law for 2 years, and its shadow reached even lonely roads like this. The posters on the town walls called her people a plague. Her people were being chased from their homes. They were being hated for the crime of existing. But the berries in the bush were bitter, and the man's eyes held a strange, quiet kindness. She took his hand. For the first time in many months, she did not feel like a burden. She felt like someone being invited back into the world. He pulled her up behind him with a single, effortless motion. She felt the raw power of the horse beneath her. She felt the radiating warmth of another human being. They rode in a heavy silence. The sun began its slow descent. The sky turned the color of a bruised, weeping plum. They reached the ranch as the first stars appeared. It was a collection of rough timber buildings. The barn was larger and better kept than the house. The men were gathered on the porch of the bunkhouse. They watched the horse approach with suspicious eyes. They saw the woman. They saw her tattered, dusty clothes. They saw the shape of her face, so different from their own. The murmurs began like a gathering storm. Silas ignored them completely. He helped Mei Lin down with a gentleness that surprised the men. He led her to the back door of the main house. The kitchen was a scene of total disaster. Flour was spilled like snow across the floor. Grease was caked an inch thick on the iron stove. It smelled of rot and failed attempts at survival. Mei Lin stood in the center of the wreckage. She did not cry. She did not utter a word of complaint. She found a worn broom in the corner. She found a tattered rag. She looked at Silas. "Water," she said. He pointed to the iron pump outside. He brought in 2 heavy wooden buckets. He stayed by the door and watched her. She moved with the grace of a bird in flight. Quick, efficient. She did not waste a single motion. By the time the moon rose, the worst of the filth was gone. The stove was not perfect, but it was usable. Her arms trembled from hunger and exhaustion. Still, she found a sack of wrinkled potatoes, a side of salt bacon, and a small hidden jar of dried red peppers. The men filed in much later. They were ready to grumble. They were ready to laugh at the stranger in their kitchen. Then the scent hit them. It was not the smell of burnt beans. It was something deep, something savory and rich, something that made their mouths ache with longing. Mei Lin had sliced the potatoes until they were thin as paper. She had rendered the bacon until it was golden and crisp. She had used the peppers to wake up the tired meat. She had found wild onions growing near the pump. She set the plates down with a quiet dignity. She did not look the men in the eye. She stood by the stove, her hands folded in her apron. The foreman was a man named Miller. He was a giant of a man, loud and quick to anger. He took a massive bite. He stopped chewing midway. The room went deathly quiet. He looked at the other men, his eyes wide. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. The only sound in the room was the scraping of forks on tin. Respect did not arrive that night. Not yet. But doubt had taken its first step backward. They ate like men who had been wandering in a desert for years. Silas sat at the head of the long table. He watched Mei Lin. She was eating a small, humble bowl in the dark corner. She was eating while standing up. He felt a sudden, sharp pang in his chest. He had 1,000 acres of land. He had a grand house built of cedar. But in that moment, he felt very small. That night, Mei Lin slept on a thin cot in the pantry. It was the finest sleep of her entire life. The walls were solid and did not shake. The roof did not leak the cold Nevada rain. She was no longer a ghost on the road, but she knew this peace was fragile as glass. The year 1884 was not kind to women of her blood.
The territory was shifting beneath their feet. The railroad was finished, and the gold was running thin. The anger in the towns was growing like a spreading wildfire. But for tonight, she had a fire, and she had a purpose. She woke long before the sun touched the ridge. She started the fire with practiced ease. She found a bag of raw coffee beans. She ground them by hand, the rhythm steady as a heartbeat. The aroma drifted across the yard to the bunkhouse.
It was like a siren song to the weary. The men appeared at the kitchen door. They looked different today. Their shirts were tucked in. They had splashed cold water on their faces. Mei Lin had made biscuits. They were light, fluffy, and tasted of heaven. She had made a thick gravy using the bacon fat. She added a pinch of ginger she had carried in her pocket. It was a secret, a taste of a home she would never see again.
The men did not know what the flavor was. They only knew they wanted more of it. Silas came in last. He looked at the clean, white-scrubbed table. He looked at his men. For the first time in a year, they were smiling. A happy crew is a productive crew. A well-fed man is a man who stays loyal. "You did good, Mei Lin," he said. She did not know all the words, but she knew the sound of her name. She liked the way he said it. He did not spit it out like a curse. He said it like a quiet prayer at the end of a long day. The change did not happen overnight. For the first week, the men still watched her with hard eyes. By the second week, they stopped complaining. By the third, they began leaving their empty plates cleaner than church silver. Only then did the ranch begin to change. The kitchen became the warm, beating heart of the land.
Mei Lin did not just cook. She steadied the place, meal by meal, stitch by stitch, quiet act by quiet act. She mended the torn, dusty shirts of the hands. She tended a small, stubborn garden in the lee of the house. She found wild herbs in the high hills. She knew which ones could soothe a hacking cough. She knew which ones could heal a jagged rope burn.
When Miller split his palm on a broken gate latch, Mei Lin cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight, and saved him from losing the use of 2 fingers. After that day, even Miller lowered his voice when he spoke to her. The men began to bring her small tokens of their gratitude. A smooth, pretty rock from the creek bed. A handful of wildflowers tied with twine. A new, stiff cotton apron they bought with their own pay in town. One by one, they stopped using the cruel word they had first thrown at her. It was a title of respect she had earned with her own 2 hands. But outside the borders of the Thorn Ranch, the world grew darker. There was ugly talk in the nearby town of Morrow. The mines were closing their gates. White laborers were losing their livelihood. They needed a target for their boiling rage. They blamed the immigrants. They wanted someone to break. Silas heard the whispers when he went for supplies. He saw the posters nailed to the livery stable. He felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He thought of the woman in his kitchen. He thought of the way she hummed ancient songs while she worked. He thought of the way she stood on the porch to watch the sunset. He realized with a start that he could not imagine the ranch without her. He could not imagine his own life without her presence. He began staying in the kitchen longer each night, after the men had gone to their bunks. They would sit by the dying embers of the fire. He would teach her the words of his land. She would teach him the words of her ancestors. Shun for the mountains that surrounded them. Huo for the fire that kept them alive. Sin for the heart that beat within them both. One night, the wind began to howl with a new, terrifying intensity.
A storm was screaming down from the high Sierras. It was early October, but the frost was already deep. Silas looked at her across the flickering candlelight. "Mei-Lin," he said, "you are safe here." She looked deep into the orange heart of the fire. "Nowhere is truly safe," she whispered. She had seen the smoke of the riots in San Francisco.
She had seen the charred remains of the camps in the north. She knew that hate was like a Nevada winter. It could freeze even the warmest, most honest heart. Silas reached across the rough wooden table. He did not grab her hand. He simply rested his hand near hers, an invitation. "I will protect you," he said. It was a promise. In a lawless land, a promise is the only currency that matters. He meant it with every fiber of his being.
The first snow fell that very night. It was not a gentle dusting. It was a thick, suffocating veil of white. It was beautiful. It was also a death sentence. The cattle were trapped in the high draw. They needed to be moved to the lower valley immediately. The winter gather was the lifeblood of the ranch. If they lost the herd, Silas would lose the land. If he lost the land, he would lose her.
Silas and his men rode out at the first crack of dawn. Mei-Lin watched them disappear into the white wall of the storm. She felt a cold, hard knot tighten in her stomach. She knew these mountains. She knew how easily they could swallow a man whole. She did not sit idle. She began to prepare for a crisis she felt in her bones. She did not just cook for the day. She cooked for survival. She made batches of hardtack that would last for weeks. She dried long strips of beef over the stove. She prepared jars of thick soup that could be heated in a heartbeat. The storm did not wait for the men to return. By noon, the sky had turned a bruised, terrifying black. The wind transformed into a screaming monster. It whipped the snow into a blinding frenzy. Mei-Lin could not even see the barn, just 20 yards away. She kept the kitchen fire roaring until the iron glowed red. She waited. The hours crawled by like dying animals. The sun vanished, leaving only the white dark. No one returned. Then she heard it, a faint, ragged shout, the terrified whinny of a horse. Mei-Lin did not hesitate. She grabbed a heavy lantern. She wrapped herself in Silas's old, oversized wool coat. She stepped out into the crushing weight of the white. The wind hit her like a physical blow, knocking her back. She gritted her teeth until they felt like they might crack. She pushed forward, one agonizing step at a time. She saw a dark, slumped shape near the fence line. It was Miller. He was draped over his horse like a sack of grain. His face was a ghastly shade of blue. "Help," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Mei-Lin did not ask where Silas was. She knew Miller would never have left his side unless he was forced. She helped the giant man into the warmth of the house. She dragged him inch by inch to the fire. She did not waste time with tears. She stripped off his frozen, ice-caked boots. She wrapped his frostbitten feet in towels she had heated on the stove. She forced hot, spicy broth down his throat. "The boss," Miller gasped, his lungs rattling. "The North Ridge. His horse." Mei-Lin's heart stopped for a single beat. The North Ridge was less than 2 miles away. On a clear day, it was nothing. In this storm, it might as well have been the far side of the moon. She looked at Miller. He could not walk. The other men were lost in the whiteout, scattered to the winds. She was the only one left. She knew the slope. She had walked near that ridge before, gathering bitterroot and winter sage. She knew where the fence dipped. She knew where the wind cut hardest. She did not think about the Exclusion Act. She did not think about the laws that said she didn't belong. She did not think about her own fragile life. She only thought of the man who had looked at her at the berry bush. She went to the freezing stable. There was an old, stubborn mule named Barnaby. He was slow, he was ugly, but he was strong as the earth itself. She saddled him with hands that shook from the cold. She tied a long, heavy rope to the porch post. She unspooled it as she rode out into the void. It was her only lifeline, her only way back to the world of the living. The journey was a nightmare of ice and wind. The snow reached the mule's chest. The wind tried to tear the soul out of her body. She screamed his name until her throat was raw. The wind swallowed her voice and laughed. She kept going.
She counted her steps to stay sane. 1, 2, 3. She thought of the smell of ginger in the kitchen. She thought of the way Silas looked when he smiled at her biscuits. She found him near a break in the fence. He was half buried in a drift. His horse was gone, lost to the mountain. He was shivering so violently his bones rattled against the ice.
He whispered. He thought he was already dead. "I hear," she said, her voice a command. She could not lift him by strength alone. So she used the rope. She tied it around his chest, looped it over the saddle horn, and urged Barnaby forward one step at a time. Silas groaned, half awake, half lost to the cold. Mei Lin did not stop. She had carried the weight of the world on her back for years. She helped him slump across the mule's back, then tied him steady with the rope.
She gripped the rope with her bare, bleeding hands. She followed it back, hand over hand, inch by agonizing inch. The yellow light of the kitchen window finally appeared. It was a tiny, flickering dot in the abyss. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. They burst through the door into the heat. The warmth of the room hit them like a physical blow. Miller was awake, his face pale but determined. He helped her get Silas to the bed by the fire. Mei Lin did not stop to rest. She worked through the entire night. She used her herbs to break the fever of the cold. She packed warm cloths around him and kept the fire alive until dawn. She whispered prayers in a language the Nevada wind did not know. By morning, the storm had spent its fury. The world was a blinding, perfect white. Silas opened his eyes. The room was quiet, save for the crackle of the wood. The smell of fresh, yeasty bread filled the air. Mei Lin was asleep in a chair beside his bed. Her hands were red, raw, and wrapped in bandages. Her face was pale as the snow outside. Silas reached out and touched her hand. She jumped awake, her eyes searching his. "She?" she asked, her voice trembling. Silas could not speak. His throat was tight, not from the cold, but from the truth. He had been looking for a cook. He had found his savior. He had found the other half of his soul. The winter of 1884 felt like the harshest winter any of them had ever known. The cattle died by the hundreds in the high passes. The Thorn Ranch teetered on the brink of total ruin. But the kitchen never went cold. Mei Lin found ways to keep them alive. She traded her expert sewing skills in town for grain. She used every scrap of the cattle they managed to save. She made meals that kept the men's spirits from breaking. The ranch hands worked harder than they ever had. They mended fences in the freezing dark. They protected the remaining herd with their lives. They did it because they knew a hot meal was waiting for them. They did it because they knew Miss May was waiting. One day in February, a man rode up to the ranch. He was a lawman from the town of Morrow. He carried a removal notice stamped by the town council. "We're clearing out the illegals," he said, his voice cold. The language was cruel. The story does not defend it. It only shows the ugliness Mei Lin had to survive.
He looked at the ranch house with narrowed eyes. The men were in the yard, sharpening their tools. Miller stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the path. He was holding a heavy iron pitchfork. "We gotta cook," Miller said. His voice held a dangerous, low rumble. "And we got a friend." The other ranch hands moved in, forming a silent circle. They were rough men. They were hard, weathered men who had seen the worst of the world. But they had been fed by Mei Lin's hand. They had been healed by her medicine. They were not going to let her go. The lawman looked at their faces. He saw the fire of conviction in their eyes. He saw that he was outnumbered by men who no longer cared for the law of the town. "This ain't over," he muttered, though his hand shook. He turned his horse and rode away into the melting slush.
Silas came out of the house. He looked at his men, the brothers he had found in the dirt. He looked at Mei Lin standing in the kitchen doorway. He knew the lawman was right. The world was still a hateful, narrow-minded place. But this ranch was different. This ranch was an island of dignity in a sea of gray. That evening, Silas asked Mei Lin to walk with him. The snow was finally melting into the thirsty earth. The first hints of a stubborn spring were in the air.
They walked to the ridge, the same ridge where she had pulled him from the grave of snow. "Mei Lin," he said. He took a small wooden box from his coat pocket. It did not contain gold or silver. It held a ring carved from the heart of a mountain mahogany tree. It was strong. It was local. It was unbreakable. "I don't have much left," he said softly. "The winter took the cattle. But I have you. Not as a cook, Mei Lin. As my wife." Mei Lin looked at the simple wooden ring. She looked at the vast, endless Nevada sky. She thought of her long, impossible journey, from the crowded, humid streets of China to the dark, suffocating mines of the West, to a bitter berry bush in the middle of nowhere.
She took the ring and slid it onto her finger. "I stay," she said, "not to serve." They stood together as the sun bled into the horizon. It was a new world. The year 1885 was coming. It would bring its own set of storms and sorrows, but they were ready to face them. The whole ranch had once depended on her cooking. By spring, it depended on her courage.
And Mei Lin, who had arrived with nothing, finally had a home that carried her name with honor. If you were moved by Mei Lin's unyielding spirit, please subscribe. We tell the stories of the forgotten heroes of the Great West, the women who built this world with their bare, bleeding hands. Leave a comment if you believe Silas did the right thing. Tell us about a meal that changed the course of your life. Mei Lin's kitchen stayed warm for 40 more years. The Thorn Ranch became one of the most respected places in the territory. People traveled for days just to taste her bread and to hear her story. The story of the starving widow who became the heart of the American frontier. Next time, we will tell the tale of the lady outlaw of the Red Rocks, a woman who chose a silver revolver over a kitchen hearth, and a love that burned brighter than the desert sun. See you in the next story. Good night from the frontier.